Happy spring, guys, and happy harvesting for your bok choys. Excited about this one. Look at that. Beautiful spring bok choy. If you want to learn how to grow this, stick with me and we'll talk about how to grow this beautiful bok choy. Hi guys, welcome to Garden on a Hill, where we talk about easy home gardening. My name is Vin, and today I'm going to share you my 5 tips how to grow these beautiful bok choys in the spring. As you know, it's very challenging to grow these favorite Asian greens that we put in stir fries, in stews, in soups in the spring, because it's a cool season plant and it tends to not like it when it gets warm. So how do we avoid failing at that, and how do we get a successful harvest? I mean, look at this one. It's bolting, so it's time to harvest. Well, we have a lot of them and they look really good. We're ready for some good bok choy, so come with me and I'll show you my 5 tips. Tip number 1, choose a variety that tolerates more heat. So in my case, here in zone 7B, especially in the south, when spring comes, we have days where sometimes it's 30, and then the next few days it's like 50, 60, 70s, or 80s. So choose a variety that can tolerate some of the heat when it gets a little warmer. In my case, it is the Shanghai bok choy. If you can see, it's the one that has a green stalk. It doesn't turn white like the regular bok choy, which you're more familiar with the white stalk. This one in my area, I noticed, can handle more of that change. I noticed bok choys in my area will bolt once the temperature is constantly around 70s to 80s. So we did have 70s to 80s for 2 weeks, and we came from 2 weeks ago. We actually had a day where it was 27 and 30, so they started to bolt. Now, if you have this warmer season variety, it can tolerate that temperature change, but now it's getting too warm and it's starting to bolt. But it's a good one to start with if you have the same situation as I have. Right. Tip number 2, start your seeds inside your indoor seed starter setup. You would need this because bok choy seeds would need to germinate around 50 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and you will most likely not have that if you direct sow outside during February, which when I start my process. Remember, in spring you have a very limited time to grow bok choy, because especially here in the south, and I don't know where you're watching from, but here we have days where it could go down to 30, and the next few weeks we have 60s to 70s to 80s sometimes. So if you take advantage of starting your seeds indoors, which I did in February, it was still around 30s here in Georgia. I started it inside my seed starter and it was about 70 degrees inside there, and it did germinate. It took about a month, so I started February 20 and then I transplanted them out. It was already March 20, so it was a month for the seedlings to grow, and by the time I put them out, it was still around 30s to 40s constantly, and they did pretty well. So take advantage of starting your indoor seed starter, and that's kind of the only way you can start bok choy for spring harvest. Tip number 3, by now you know we have a love-hate relationship with the sun when growing bok choy in the spring. Choose a spot in your garden that has partial shade. So as you can see, all my bok choys here are in partial shade because of the trees behind them that are very tall. Most of my back garden is partial shade, but those are most of the partial shade areas where I selected where to plant the bok choy. Remember, we're trying not to put the bok choy in an area where it gets too hot, but it does need a little sun to make sure its leaves come out. So if you have a shady spot in your garden, make sure, maybe try to put a bok choy in that area. Tip number 4, make sure you have a rich loose, loamy, high organic matter soil. Bok choy does feed a lot, especially nitrogen, so you want to prepare the area to have a rich soil and also just clean it up. Make sure the chunks are broken down and everything is a finer texture because they are very shallow rooted and they would like a loose soil. I add more compost and soil conditioner into this area where I'm going to put the transplant to make sure they have a loose, well-draining soil, but also a soil that will keep moisture. Bok choys don't like to dry out, so make sure you can add some peat moss in here as well to retain that moisture. As I transplant this and the plant grows, you'll notice I also add grass clippings around the hole in addition to the plastic mulch so I can keep as much moisture in there. I typically water these probably once a week, or if it's a rainy week, just once every 2 weeks. Just make sure the soil doesn't dry out around it. Tip number 5, make sure your soil is fertilized. Of course, you have your yearly fertilization of your garden beds, but before I start planting my seedlings, I use a tablespoon of biotone into the hole that I'm gonna dig the seedlings in. Now, I started the seeds February 20 and then transplanted them March 20, so that's about a month. I didn't fertilize the seeds when I started, and I only fertilized this with biotone when I transplanted it to the garden beds. And then after that, you want to make sure you fertilize every 10 to 15 days with a soluble fertilizer. It could be a fish fertilizer if you want, or it could be a synthetic one if you wish to. Bok choy does love nitrogen to keep these leaves green and growing. So pretty much you can use that. I also used alfalfa pellets here, and it did work. It did give it some nitrogen. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind. So it's almost been 60 days. Now we're at day 54 and I'm ready to harvest because they're bolting. That's the best sign you'll know in spring bok choy growing. And you'll notice that in the front area here, they're planted without the plastic, and at the back they are. I did notice that the ones that are planted directly on the garden bed without the plastic, they're smaller than the ones in the plastic. So I bet you the plastic helped to retain that moisture better. Anyway, one thing though is bok choys are prone to pests, so you want to make sure you keep on looking at the leaves if something's eating them. And I do have them here. I have slugs and bugs, but they're in a manageable level where I can just pick them off the plant, so I don't really spray anything. Now, if you do have pest problems later on, you will need to know what that pest is. Typically, it's the same pest for cabbages, like moths, caterpillars, worms, but you need to know what that pest is to address that problem. But again, just be on the lookout if there are any pests for your bok choy. So let's go ahead and harvest these and see if my tips work for me, because I'm excited to cook them tonight. So look at this. We have a ton of beautiful bok choy, 2 basins full, and we'll be happy for the week enjoying this. You can always do succession planting on these so you don't have to harvest them all at one time, which means you basically start intervals of 1 week. So you plant each transplant every 1 week, so you have a bok choy every week. But I just wanted to grow them all at once because it's a beautiful harvest all the time. So if you are interested in growing bok choy plants, I do grow it in the fall, but again, I'm sharing this adventure because it's an adventure to grow them in the spring, and I hope you learned something from this. Now, if you want to see more videos like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button, you hit that like button if you like this video, share this with other people so they can learn how to grow easy bok choy, and make sure you hit that bell button so every time I upload a new video, you get to learn and you get notified. Thank you so much. Let's eat these.